The email arrived without sound, without warning, without mercy, blinking onto her phone screen like a verdict already decided. On Christmas Eve, while the city outside glowed with lights and laughter she could not hear, the deaf widow was fired with a single sterile sentence that erased 5 years of loyalty. Snow pressed against the windows of the nearly empty office, and as she stared at the words, her hands began to shake, not because she was cold, but because something inside her finally broke. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that still happen in this world, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this only travel as far as generous hearts allow. Her name was Eleanor, and silence had been her lifelong companion. She lost her hearing as a child after a fever burned through her small body like a wildfire, leaving her world forever muted. She learned to read lips, to feel vibrations through floors, to sense emotions in faces the way others sense tone. Years later, she lost her husband too, a gentle man who used to drum messages into her palm when words failed. Cancer took him quickly, and silence became heavier after that, no longer just soundless but lonely. Work had been her anchor since then. The small publishing office gave her purpose, routine, and just enough income to keep the lights on in her modest apartment. She believed loyalty mattered. She believed being useful meant being safe. Christmas Eve proved how fragile those beliefs were. The building emptied early that day, people rushing off with wrapped gifts and flushed faces. Eleanor stayed late as always, finishing end-of-year filings with meticulous care. She liked order. It kept panic at bay. When she finally checked her phone, the termination notice was already hours old. Budget cuts, restructuring, best wishes for the future. No meeting, no explanation. No acknowledgement of the woman who stayed late when others left early, who never complained, who learned new software by watching screens instead of listening to instructions. She packed her desk slowly, every movement deliberate, as if moving through water. By the time she stepped outside, snow had thickened into a white curtain, and the world looked like a photograph drained of sound and warmth. The days that followed blurred into one long winter evening. Christmas came and went quietly, a single candle lit by the window, a photograph of her husband placed beside it. She rationed groceries, calculated bills, and avoided the mirror because it showed a woman who looked older than she felt. Rejection has a way of crawling under the skin. For Eleanor, it whispered that being deaf made her expendable, that being a widow made her invisible, that being alone meant there would be no safety net when she fell. She applied for jobs anyway, dozens of them, sending resumes into the void and waiting for replies that never came. Each morning she woke before dawn, wrapped herself in a coat that smelled faintly of dust and winter, and walked the neighborhood to clear her head, counting her steps like prayers. One gray afternoon, the universe shifted in a way she did not yet understand. She volunteered at the community food pantry, a habit she kept even when her own cupboards were bare. It made her feel connected, useful, present. That day, the pantry was more crowded than usual, the holiday rush spilling into the new year. Eleanor worked in the back, sorting donations by touch and sight, when she noticed a man struggling near the entrance. He moved with the careful urgency of someone carrying too much. 3 small children clung to him, identical faces peeking out from mismatched hats and coats, their eyes wide with hunger and embarrassment. Eleanor recognized that look. It was the same one she saw in her mirror every morning. The man was a widower, though she would learn that later. His wife had died in an accident the previous spring, leaving him with triplets barely old enough to understand absence. Grief had carved deep lines into his face, but there was a steadiness to him, a determination born of necessity. He worked nights, pieced together childcare with favors and luck, and came to the pantry because pride could not feed 3 growing children. When Eleanor approached, he spoke too quickly, not realizing she could not hear him. She gently pointed to her ear and then to her eyes, explaining without words. Instead of frustration, his face softened. He slowed down, exaggerated his lip movements, and used his hands clumsily but earnestly. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of loss, of endurance, of trying anyway. Eleanor began helping him every week after that. She showed him how to organize the pantry shelves more efficiently, how to stretch meals without losing dignity, how to apply for assistance programs he did not know existed. In return, he fixed the loose hinge on her apartment door, carried heavy bags without being asked, and brought his children along, letting their quiet joy fill the spaces where silence once pressed too hard. The triplets adored Eleanor. They learned to wave instead of shout, to tap her arm gently before showing her their drawings, to communicate with their whole faces. In their presence, Eleanor felt something she had not felt since her husband died, needed in a way that warmed rather than drained her. Winter loosened its grip slowly. Snow melted into slush, then into memory. Eleanor's job search continued, but now her days had rhythm again. The widower, whose name was Daniel, spoke to her about his work struggles, his fear of failing his children, his exhaustion. Eleanor listened with her eyes and her heart, offering practical help where she could. She noticed how carefully he folded the children's coats, how he always made sure they ate first, how grief lived in him like a quiet ache rather than a loud wound. Their connection deepened without fanfare, built on shared errands, shared glances, shared understanding that some losses never fully heal but can make room for new shapes of love. An opportunity arrived unexpectedly, as they often do. The community center announced a grant for inclusive education programs, seeking someone to coordinate accessibility services. Eleanor hesitated before applying. Years of being overlooked had taught her to keep expectations low, but Daniel encouraged her, not with grand speeches, but with steady belief, helping her prepare, practicing presentations with her, watching her sign and explaining when needed. The interview panel saw not a limitation but a bridge. They saw a woman who understood silence and connection better than most. When Eleanor received the offer, she cried in a way that shook her whole body, tears blurring the world into light and shadow. It was more than a job, it was proof that she still belonged somewhere. As spring edged towards summer, their lives intertwined more fully. Eleanor's apartment filled with small shoes by the door, with drawings taped crookedly to the fridge, with laughter she could not hear but felt in vibrations and smiles. Daniel found stability too, promoted at work after months of relentless effort. Together they built something fragile and strong, a family stitched together from loss and hope. Eleanor still remembered the sting of that Christmas Eve email, but it no longer defined her. Pain became part of her story, not the ending. If this story has touched your heart so far, pause for a moment and let that feeling linger. Stories like Eleanor's are reminders that compassion can rewrite endings we thought were final. Just before the ending, we have a special request for you. Please comment the word hope if you believe that even after loss, life can surprise us with light. On a quiet evening months later, Eleanor stood at the community center after hours, watching Daniel help the triplets with a school project spread across the floor. The room glowed with soft light, and though she could not hear their laughter, she saw it in their movements, in the way their shoulders shook and their faces shone. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, about how a single act of dismissal could have sealed her into isolation. Instead, a chain of small kindnesses had pulled her back toward the world. Being fired on Christmas Eve had felt like the end, but it had been a beginning disguised as cruelty. Life did not become perfect. There were hard days, misunderstandings, moments when grief resurfaced without warning. But there was also resilience, community, and love that grew not from fairy tales but from shared survival. Eleanor learned that hope does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a pantry door, with 3 small hands reaching out, with a widower who slows down so he can be understood. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness can change the course of a life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach hearts that may be hurting in silence. And remember this, even when the world seems to turn its back on you, the next chapter may already be walking towards you, carrying hope in the most unexpected form.